Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Buddhist Biohacker. My name is Lisa Gunshore, your host and mystic guide as always, and I am here with the incredible Julie Hoyle. Welcome back, Julie.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here again, Lisa.
Oh, me too. Our last series was all about resilience and really ended on a high note. I felt like I was riding high off that last show for a while. The energy was so amazing. And here we are today, and we're going to talk really the next 3 days in a row. We are going to be talking about the gifts of resilience. So welcome in, everybody. I see you all ticking up there in the screen. So please share where you're from, how you're feeling. If you watched the first 3 parts episode that we did, and what you think about resilience, I'd love to hear as well. And down at the bottom, I have everything you need to connect with us. So juliehoyle.org is Julie's beautiful website. She's written several books. She has several courses available and also does online coaching. And her YouTube channel is Talking True with Julie Hoyle. And of course, you're here on the Buddhist Biohacker YouTube channel, and my website is buddhistbiohacker.com. The only challenge with that is spelling Buddhist right, so don't forget the H, because I've had that happen many times. So I'm going to set us up here. Today, we're going to talk about the alchemy of adversity and really what adversity teaches us that comfort never can. And I want to just kick it off with this quote that I really liked, which a couple quotes actually. So the first one is, I trust that even in the fire, I am becoming something sacred. And I also want to share, I love transcendentalism so much. And Henry Thoreau said, I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And Hemingway said, of course, famous quote from Hemingway from Farewell to Arms is, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. So kicking us off, Julie, with adversity and how it becomes our strength.
Yes. I mean, I have so many stories, but I don't know whether you want to start with an anecdote.
You can start, and then, both of us have been through it. So I think wherever you want to start, and then I can jump into with plenty of stories also.
So I have told this story before, but I think it's really worth sharing given the state of the world today, because there's so much uncertainty, particularly around finances and stability and all of those things. And I'll be as brief as I can, but I think it was October 2008, a day or two before Tony and I were due to fly to a friend's wedding in California. And we booked to stay in this really beautiful hotel. It was really further out of our budget than we would normally pay. I think it was around $300 a night or something. But we figured, for 2 or 3 nights, and that's before tax, in 2008. So, we splashed out. We decided we would go stay in this beautiful hotel and just celebrate being with our friend in California for those few days. And the night before we were due to fly out, we turned on BBC World News, and there was a segment about a bank that had gone bust. And we realized that they were talking about the bank that we had the bulk of our savings in. Okay. And because mail has always been very slow getting to us. The bank had kind of joined forces with another bank, changed its name, and so pretty much all of our savings were invested in this bank and this banking system that had gone bust. So we were essentially looking at, losing everything. And, I think it's a tough pill to swallow for anybody, but particularly if you're in your 40s or 50s or later, it can be really terrible. I mean, people take their lives because you haven't got the same amount of kind of catch up time and starting up again time, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we saw the news, we were horrified, and I went straight away, because there's a sort of shock response when these things happen. And of course, I went to the usual trigger, which was around finances, because I've been raised in a working class environment with no money. We were quite poor. So it used to bring, these triggers around money used to bring up tremendous fear. And I'd been down that road before, but I remember thinking, I cannot go down into this kind of dark hole. I have to do something energetically. And so I took myself away and went and meditated and started kind of envisioning, light and a tree and beautiful, blossoms and fruit and all of those things to try and work on the issue energetically before I was swallowed in it. So anyway, that really, really helped. And then every time fear came up, I would start envisioning this golden fruit and abundance and all of these things. At the same time, we had just signed to move to a new apartment, which was a lot more rent. It was 2 or 3 times the amount of rent we were paying. And so the normal kind of response would have been to sort of contract, close it down, try and find a cheaper place, try and store up the energy, and the financial energy. And I just said, no, I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm going to think abundantly, feel expansive, go and enjoy this wedding in this beautiful hotel, take on the apartment, don't break the lease, but just go forward with it and think and act with abundance. So I did. And to cut a long story short, what happened was the banquet, there was an intervention from the UK government. Somehow, magically, we managed to get, I think it was 98% of our money back by the time, everything was squared away. It took a few years, but we got the money back. We didn't lose very much at all. And in fact, we were in a much more abundant place. And of course, that started to manifest through our work and through all the other things we were doing. But it was a really big lesson for me because I could see how, there's an energetic response before we do anything. And it's fear-based, and it can either cause you to contract down, or you can actually face it and say, no, I'm not going into that place again. I have to transform it. So I thought, transforming it from the inside out really is key, and it makes a huge difference.
That reminds me of that story in Autobiography of a Yogi, where Yogananda took his brother, wasn't it? He took his brother, and he was like, if we can get, on this train and go have this experience and eat and do all those things and get home, his brother said he'd be his disciple. And they ended up like eating with a king or some crazy, it was like crazy. And so that reminds me of that story, which is such a great chapter. And thank you, Tracy, for joining in. Love having you here for sure. So please, everyone, share where you're from and all that good stuff. Yeah, it reminds me too of, when I went to see the Dalai Lama in Washington, D.C., like that was an experience for me where I went with nothing. And it was 12 days that I was staying with someone I didn't know in a hotel, because I was sharing a hotel and I had just enough for the hotel and just enough for the flight. And, was living off the volunteers, got a volunteer meal every day. So I was living off that volunteer meal and taking the train and getting back and forth. And sometimes going into those situations, I mean, there's so much fear around it. And then, like you said, if you can stay positive, and I also think there's like a surrender to it, like surrendering to, I'm going to be in this experience, and, trusting that you're going to be taken care of. And also that there's a reason you're in that experience. I always felt like, especially the times I saw His Holiness, I felt like every time was very challenging financially for me. And I felt like it needed to be. It was almost like a humility. It was like putting me into a place of humility while I was there. I wasn't having some kind of lavish experience. I was, volunteering so that I could, I couldn't afford the tickets either. So I was volunteering so I could, do it. And I think the richness I received in this life from those 6 experiences as a volunteer. I mean, I met the Dalai Lama. I touched him, and that was because I volunteered, because I didn't have any money. And I think it's an interesting thing to think, like, when we're faced with things like, the financial hardship, sometimes really incredible gifts can come out of that.
Yes. Yeah. And look, what happened as well was I was really inspired to write about it. So I wrote an article for Tiny Buddha, and which has a huge readership. And there was an incredible response because so many people struggle with the fear around financial loss and fear of uncertainty around the financial situation. And that's why so many people stay in jobs that they really hate, because they're afraid to close that down, especially if they're earning a good salary, and there's fear around, what if I don't get something, something that's kind of equitable in terms of the salary. So, the fear around the financial kind of spectrum can be really debilitating, and it can really hold you in its grip for decades, actually, if you don't really look at the root of the root and start doing the energy work around, what you're trying to resist, because it's really about, resisting and pushing down and or trying to fix and trying to, make yourself sort of feel better when all that fear starts to come up.
This is an interesting topic, and I did just drop everybody in the live comments. The blog that Julie wrote is called The Real Measure of Your Wealth, and the link is in the comments. So all of you should be able to see that there. But it's interesting, Julie, because just a few hours ago, my husband and I were talking about someone that we care about who is really trapped in an unhealthy relationship because of money.
Yes.
And even more wild is we had a person that was like waiting on us today say that so many people, that there was just an article that was written about, I can't afford to leave you, is the title of the article. And so while we're talking about this, it's really making me think about this, like, because I was saying, like, it's amazing to me how difficult it is for people to end toxic situations because of money, and often because we don't see a way out with the money. And I think a lot of people are afraid to experience the collapse from the money. That's the hard part, is when you build a relationship and you have all these financial ties, like, collapsing that feels very scary. And then you end up staying in this really environment. And I'm sure, Julie, it's really difficult when you're reading people and coaching people to hear them share their story, when you want to be like, just go, just get out, don't worry about it, like, it'll all get figured out. But I've been in that situation where I wanted to leave a marriage years ago, and it felt really scary to walk away from something, from my house and from my pets and from the money. So, this thing about facing adversity, like, it's really hard to get through that situation and then make the decision. It's a hard decision to make, and you have to be willing to let everything go.
Yes. And I think the big part of that is that most people don't realize that it's an energetic component that has them in its grip. If you understand that, this fear that comes up that can feel really overwhelming, specifically around fear of loss or fear of lack. If you understand it's energy, it's just energy, and that you can face it and work with it, then it just transforms everything. It really, it just dissolves it from the inside out. But if you're fixated on, the what ifs around looking for another job, or especially if you've got kids, and you're in a relationship and that, that you want to get out of, but there's fear around money and all of that. It can be, and obviously I'm not minimizing any of that, but if you have an understanding that it's energetic and you can work with the energy of it and change it from the energy of lack to the energy of abundance, it really does make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of the duality, like there's always the opposite, and the opposite of fear is faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so how do we shift from that fear perspective into faith? And I have to work on that. Like money and I, if money was my boyfriend, we would constantly be fighting, you know? And so, and honestly, that's really been my own practice recently is I want to treat money like I'm in a relationship with it instead of like putting a restraining order on it. You know what I mean? Like that's like, and it requires effort. Like you're saying with the energetic piece is like, what does money represent to us? For everybody,
Mm-hmm.
it's different, right? But what does it represent to us? What are we afraid of if we don't have it?
Mm-hmm.
Some people hold on to it super tightly. Other people are very generous. You know, there's all sorts of things that are challenging with the finances and the adversity of that, especially in this world right now, like the economy and the tariffs and all these things that are going on is like, it creates so much stress. And it's like, how do you expand? And like you're saying, there's this, when I went to psychic school, we learned about havingness.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at havingness as a rose.
Mm-hmm.
How does it feel to expand your rose out and have more havingness or more abundance? And I think what's interesting is when I started to expand the energy, I felt uncomfortable with expanded energy. It wasn't like, ooh, if I won the lottery, I felt great. It was uncomfortable. And so you want to look at those energetic components of like what life, like I think we're comfortable in a certain path too financially.
Yes, and I think certainly in my case, I was really used to being in an environment as a kid that was constraining around money, and you get used to the kind of the comfort of that in a way. You get used to not having. You get used to the kind of the mindset of lack. And so anything that feels more expansive can feel, as you said, very unusual or in some cases a bit threatening or a bit, scary.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it can be really tricky to navigate. It really can.
Very tricky, very tricky. And I want to pull up, we're talking about like resilience, right? And what's the gifts of resilience? And I know I sent you a post on Instagram. I'm going to pull it up because it was so good. Let's see here. So I loved this. The holistic psychologist on Instagram said, signs you have post-traumatic resilience.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, what an interesting way to define that. And the first one was a strong sense of humor. The second one was intense creativity.
Yes.
Number 3 was deep empathy. Number 4 was the ability to be resourceful. Number 5, vivid imagination. And number 6, grit and determination. And, I was inspired by the creativity and the resourcefulness. I've run my own coaching business since 2006, and I've never been able to invest in it. It's not like I got money and made a business. Like I've had to do everything from a very resourceful place. So when I was reflecting on today's show, I was thinking, that's probably my biggest gift from all of the things I've been through is my ability to be resourceful, even thinking to volunteer for the Dalai Lama so I could go. Like even that was my resourcefulness. And so, I think that's one of the powerful gifts of resilience is being able to be resourceful and also that high creativity. I think I was just in New Orleans, Julie, and I was walking down the street, and sorry, I'm going to go on and on now because this is a great story, but it was 4:30 in the morning after a show, and we were staying on Bourbon Street and Canal Street. So we're in the heart of New Orleans, and they were hosing down the streets from all the partying. and there were some homeless folks laying in different spots, and it was dark, and we were walking to the hotel, and I said to Scott, I said, this is the shadow work no one talks about. Like, no one wants to see this. Like, this isn't what, no one's staying on this street. Like, I don't know why we picked where we picked to stay, but we did. And I'm like, everybody's staying over in the fancy part, 4 blocks over kind of thing. And I was like, this is when people ask about shadow work, like, this is what they don't talk about, is the challenges. I mean, the people that lost their homes that are still shuttered up from Katrina, and the profound creativity in New Orleans, the music, the insane music and costumes and colors coming from this dark, tough energy. And it's just that is like, to me, like the most beautiful display of what shadow work and going through tough times is all about, as you come out of it with this intense creativity and resourcefulness and ability to just be in the world.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, we see the same in the Bahamas. Since Tony and I have been here, we counted once, we've been through 18 hurricanes. And that doesn't include tropical storms, which can be equally as bad, right? But 18 times we've been through hurricanes that have been, some of which have been really devastating, some of which people are still suffering from because they lost their homes, they didn't have insurance because the insurance companies wouldn't, the premiums went up so high and they just couldn't afford it. But what comes out of all of that, and also, the cost of living here is really, really high. It's like 3 times the cost of many things in the US. And so, it's very challenging. But out of that, the Bahamian people have a real resilience. They take things lightly. They have an amazing sense of humor. They're very resourceful. They're very connected spiritually. Most Bahamians have a faith and they have a practice or a church, that they belong to. And so, those are the positives that come out of it. And they don't take things lightly, such as water. I mean, this morning, Tony and I got up at, 5:45, went, tried to make coffee. We had no water. We couldn't shower. The water was just off. There was no notice of it. So, and the same with power. Power can go off like with no notice at all. It just will go off. And so we have great appreciation for everything, and we don't take the things that are normal to most people. We don't take them for granted, because in the Bahamas they could be here 1 minute and gone the next. So it's the same here, and again, people are really creative. They're really resourceful. There are many entrepreneurial type people that are trying to figure out ways to generate income in a way that's kind of outside of the mainstream. And you do see a lot of that here.
Yeah. And I think it's important for everyone to accept the invitation when adversity comes their way, and to remember that it's here to support you. And it's here to help you transform. There's seeds of growth within the adversity. And I know for me, I've had a good life. I have nothing to complain about. I've always been in like the middle class realm, I suppose. But I made some choices, like through my experiences with the Dalai Lama. Like, I remember choosing to move downtown Denver in a studio apartment that was very inexpensive, that didn't have a dishwasher, that I didn't have a car. I walked to work. And those were conscious choices I made to create humility for myself and to be in situations that I had been afraid of, I think, up to that point. And I'm still not really sure what all that's about. I haven't given it too much thought until right now when we're talking about it, but I did. I made those choices because I felt like, after sitting with Tibetan men in their 70s who were talking about fleeing Tibet and going over the Himalayas and losing people along the way, you really start to realize how blessed your life is and how much adversity you haven't had to face.
Mm-hmm.
And it really put me in a I hate to keep using the word humility, but it was a humbled space where I felt like I need to let go of some of these things I'm holding on to. Even living on Maui, as you know, Julie, that was tough. It sounds amazing. Oh, I lived on Maui, but it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough, and living conditions are tough, and buying food is hard, and you never make enough money to survive there. And so there's a real warrior energy to facing adversity and, making difficult choices for experiences and coming out of it in a different way. And, there's lots of other things too. I mean, I was sick and things like that. So we both have had our illnesses too. And I think one thing that came up for me was like this idea of the fire initiation. I remember falling years ago. I mean, it was like, I don't know, years and years ago. And I had told you about it and you said, oh, that's a fire initiation. I was like, what's that? So I want to touch on that because I think people might be in that right now and not even know it.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I remember, and specifically for women who are going through peri or full-blown menopause, that really is a fiery initiation right there. I mean, whether you're having, hot flashes or not, you're going through a really deep, very profound trial, initiation of fire and change that is kind of like being in a fire pit and being burned from the inside out. And I can speak to that. I had a lucid dream actually, and I'm not even sure I was aware that I was actually going through perimenopause because I was in my early 40s, I think, when it started to happen. But I had this full-blown lucid dream, and you know what lucid dreams are like. They're more real than the waking state. So everything that you feel is multiplied. So I had this dream where I was in this, I wasn't even sure where it was, but I was in this sort of countryside setting. It was night. I was with these Native American shamans. They'd built this huge fire and they were chanting and, calling the spirits and praying. And they invited me, they gave me these feathers to kind of shake and so on. And then they literally sort of pushed me into the middle of this fire. So I could feel like my skin and my bones and everything was hissing and crackling with the heat and the flames. And I was just being burned up. And out of that kind of the depth and the heat and the intensity of that, I could feel this energy was rising. And then out from the center of my being, this great form started to manifest. And it started to be made of smoke. And then it turned into this big creature. And then it flew out. And it was a massive, dark, black crow. And it just flew away. And then the kind of all the flames disappeared. And then these shamans were dancing and chanting, and they said that I had received the crow blessing and the initiation of the crow. And it wasn't until sometime later, especially after I'd gone through peri and then full-blown menopause, that I realized that was speaking to, and for every woman actually, the kind of the crow, the wisdom, or another way of putting it, the crone energy. You're moving from a place in your life or a stage in your life where you're fertile, where you can get pregnant, have babies and all of that. And then you're moving into this place where, that is no longer an option, but you have access to this much deeper, more vast wisdom and energy. And you can start to create in a new way, in a different way. It's not that your creative powers sort of disappear. They just become transformed into something else. And so for me, and I think for many people that I work with, especially women in their mid to late 40s, they suddenly have access to this creative energy and creative power that they feel led to give voice to, either through writing or podcasts or, music, dance, whatever it is. But it's that energy is vast. It connects you with all of life itself, and it sort of has to find a way to come through you to be expressed. And it's this crow energy, this wisdom energy that calls you to kind of respond to it and to share from this deep place.
Yeah. Wow. That's a beautiful story. And dream. I guess it's not really a story as much as it's a dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a quote that I want to share that just lines up with what you were just talking about. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, another one is true wisdom is walking through the fire and choosing not to become bitter, but to become better.
Yes.
And I think that's the choice point, I think, is when we're in these challenging situations is our reaction or our response, our responsibility to that experience and what comes from it. And I know for me, I always came back out of every health issue, every hard time. I always came back to this determination to continue to press on, to continue to get up. I remember when I was dealing with the parasites and candida and stuff, and I went to my mom's in Iowa, and I was I was not even sure I was going to live. I was just a mess. And my mom had told me, she said, you need to, basically she was like, get your shit together. Like, you need to go meditate. Like, that's what you do. You need to go do that. And I remember I got in a bathtub and I was sitting in the bathtub just looking up. I couldn't really feel a lot of my body. I was having these weird things with my vision. And I felt Archangel Michael come into the space, and he was like towering over me. And he was like, you need to get up.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get up and you need to move. And I ended up climbing out of the bathtub, and I started practicing some very simple yoga postures at the time. And, I think that's it. Like, you have to keep, or you want to choose to get up and to keep moving. And that's where the strength and the creative force, the Shakti, starts to really flow, I think, is that moment where you get up in spite of, how much you might feel beat down or even physically unable to get up,
Yeah, yes. Yeah, there's also a point of power in that as well, because I think, when you've really faced adversity, whether it's through job loss, a relationship that's gone south, or whatever the story is, when you start to agree to meet it and to work with it, there's tremendous power in sharing. And I'm not obviously saying, go out and sort of tell the world, but just sharing with people that you really trust, who can hold space for you without trying to move in and try and fix it or give you a quick answer. And then maybe find a larger audience, because I think there's tremendous wealth and value in sharing our stories. I mean, I know, as I shared, that story I spoke about on the Buddhist, Tiny Buddha website or platform. There was a great response because people can relate to it. So I think if there's a call to action with respect to sharing, it's really important to share, because even if you're helping one person, sharing your story can make a huge difference for someone. You might be the lifeline that person is looking for. And, there's tremendous value in sharing, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you, Tracy. I love the real life talk and application. Thank you for that. I think there's something too with like this idea of micro resilience experiences. And so, I always go back to conflict, because none of us want to have it. I mean, that's like, we don't like it. And honestly, that's been a practice of mine is if there's something I don't want to do or a conversation I don't want to have. And really it started probably, I don't know, probably started in 2017 or 18 for me, but I just do it. And it is really uncomfortable and hard, but moving through really difficult conversations is a great way to practice micro resilience because it forces you through a fear.
Mm-hmm.
I do not like to fly. Don't like it. I feel very stressed. I know that's not logical. And honestly, just getting on a plane is like micro resilience for me. Like it is like, I will trust in this journey and get on this plane and move through this, even though it's hard. And, you know, it's just little things like that. I think doing little things every day that, you know, remind you that you have the strength to step into it, because the gift from it is moving through it. And you have that tough conversation, or you do that chore on your to-do list you didn't want to do. And it's like, okay, I can do this. And I think it gives you strength. It's very empowering to go through those little experiences.
Yeah, because those little experiences kind of are like pennies that you can save and you know, sort of grow from. Because when you make those little kind of choices to be strong, to be resilient, then when there's a bigger call to action, you have a less fear around it. You can take a big step or a big leap of faith, and you kind of develop muscles that way. I think it just then becomes a lot easier. And when you're having to face real adversity, then you know you can do it, you know.
Yeah. I found the quote from Autobiography of a Yogi. Paramahansa says, so he's going into town without money, and Sri Yukteswar has sent him on this mission. And it says, you must not take a single rupee, you must not beg, you must not reveal to anyone your helpless condition. You must not lie down until you return with the money which will buy your train ticket.
Wow.
And then he goes through this whole thing, and it's all about sacred surrender to divine will.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a great story.
It really is. It makes me want to read the whole book again, because that whole book is just amazing. But it is a test of like, can you, like, how do you do that kind of test in your daily life? You know, can you, like you did, Julie, like you were talking about, just trusting with the financial piece?
Yeah. I mean, I've told this story before, but I think it's worth sharing in this context. Back in the days when you could make a reservation, an airline reservation, and book your tickets, you know, without having to pay up front and all of those things. I used to do that. If I wanted to go and do a retreat or a big event that was, you know, in New York or California or wherever it was, I would just kind of, you know, find out, forget the details, and I'd make the airline reservation. And without having a clue how the money would come in and how I would pay for it. And that wasn't even, you know, getting as far as looking at the cost of the actual retreat itself. But I would get the airline situation sorted. And then literally, you know, once I'd made that intention, because it's really about creating an intention to go after the things that you feel led to or nudged into, then somehow it just all sort of falls into place. But I remember doing that, you know, some years ago, booking flights, deciding that Tony and I were going to go and do this month-long retreat in New York. We didn't have money for it because we were going to go to the UK as well over the summer. And you know, to cut a long story short, we were invited to be extras in a movie that was being filmed here in Nassau. And that one day turned into 3.5 weeks, and it more than covered the cost of the retreat, the airfare, and, you know, everything else we needed. And I know that if I had, and Tony kept, he's not as gung-ho as I am in terms of just following. I mean, he trusts my vision and he trusts my capacity to kind of feel into something. But he kept saying to me, are you sure? Do you think this is going to work? And I just said, yes. I had the intention, I had the nudge. It feels right. It's going to happen. And it did. And that's happened so many times that, I really don't blink now. If I have this kind of intuitive nudge to do something, I just do it. I really do. I don't think twice about it. No matter how daunting, as you both know, creating websites, writing books, whatever it is, I normally don't have a clue. I really do not have a clue. People think, oh, but she's just saying that. She really does. She knows. I don't. Honestly, I can put my hand up and say, I don't have a bloody clue. I just know when it feels right. And I know I'll be supported. And somehow things always they just work out. But this is a big part of resilience as well, because it's really about trusting your own innate, intuitive knowing and trusting it enough to follow it and to trust that it will guide you and it will take care of all the details, rather than closing something down because you can't figure out in your head how it will work.
Yes. Guru Mai, her thoughts on resilience, she says, this is a quote, "Let your heart become so saturated with love that you are able to ride the waves of change with equipoise and find new meaning in everything that happens. Rather than praying to not have difficulties, face them and accept them as a normal part of life. With every difficulty you face, you can learn and become stronger."
Yes. 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 I mean, that really sums it up. But, again, it's like you said earlier, it's really about trusting the small things, trusting your call to action or an intuitive nudge to do something small, and then you build the muscle that then supports you taking these sort of bigger leaps of faith. And it really is a practice. It's an ongoing practice.
It is. And I would add to that, Julie, to trust your fear. Like, my fear is when I do my inner work. Like, when you start to feel afraid, oh, I don't want to have that conversation, or oh, I don't think I can get on that flight, or oh, I don't think I can take that job. That's when the self-inquiry comes in. That's the moment. That's it. Like, trust the fear, because the fear will lead you to the faith. It will lead you to what you're talking about, Julie, which is, I have no idea how I'm going to meet the Dalai Lama, but I'm going to just say I want to meet him. And 7 days later, I'm on an airplane to Berkeley, California to watch him speak. I mean, that stuff really does happen when you put your faith out there. And it's kind of fun to remember that. And to, like you're saying, Julie, like, well, what am I afraid of today? And how, I mean, I'm walking away from this conversation today asking myself that, like, where am I not trusting, not surrendering, not allowing, not going into something because of fear? It holds us back, and it's the fear is the thing that if you step into it, and like you said, I loved what you said about just when you're ready to meet it, when everything opens up and expands and you move into a new space. It's just amazing.
Yes. Well, also, when I started doing shadow work years and years and years ago, I just decided, I was tired of feeling afraid about whatever it was. And I just said, I have to make fear an ally. However it shows up, whether it's fear of lack, fear of loss, fear of stepping out, fear of being seen, whatever it was. I just said, okay, I'm going to make fear an ally. And whenever it comes up, I'll just say, okay, what are you here? Thank you for arriving. What are you here to tell me? What are you here to share? What do you want me to look at or to hear,
Yeah.
And and to really approach it from that perspective. And it's a real game changer. It's a very simple thing, but it's an absolute game changer, because usually a fear response is sort of an habitual kind of response that is really about keeping you safe. Mm-hmm. And trying to prevent you from feeling something that you don't want to feel, or get into a situation that you would rather not be in, or place you in a particular place where you have to speak up for yourself and you'd rather not, Mm-hmm. So there's always an aspect of fear that's really about self-preservation. And oftentimes it's learned behaviors from when we're kids. And a lot of it is about, there's a lot of fear around, expressing what we know to be true, sharing our truth, being real, being authentic, and all of those things. So if you can actually say, okay, fear's an ally, and then let's see what, and fear is just energy, actually. So if you can start having an authentic conversation with it, again, it's a game changer. It changes everything.
I love it. I love it. And time flies in this joint. And you all, this is just part one. We're going to be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, noon Eastern Time. And we'll just continue this. Let's just continue this. For those of you who are watching now, I'd love for you to throw in the comments, or anyone watching the replay, anything you want us to talk about this weekend while we explore the gifts of resilience. And Julie, I love you so much. And this is just the beginning. And we'll be back on tomorrow. So hang tight. And I'm going to go home and pull out my autobiography of a yogi book. And take care, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.